Markets are about to open in less than 30 seconds as spikes in the coronavirus cases across the country spark new fears and uncertainty in global markets. This as another 1.48 million people filed for unemployment benefits last week, which means nearly 50 million people have lost their jobs over the last 14 weeks. We've also learned this morning that the U.S. economy shrank by 5% in the first quarter of 2020, matching last month's predictions, the sharpest decline in GDP since the 2008 crisis. Joining me now to discuss, Seth Harris, former acting U.S. Labor Secretary under President Obama, and my dear friend Andrew Ross Sorkin, New York Times columnist, founder of The Deal Book, and co-anchor of CNBC's Squawk Box. Andrew, the business community has stressed testing from the beginning. Now the Trump administration is saying it will end federal funding for multiple testing sites, and we have seen the president for over a week talk down the importance of testing, saying it's slowing, and basically being disingenuous about the numbers. Is this why the markets are suddenly reacting to the negative?
I think there's a couple of factors here, but the biggest one really is just the spike and spread we're seeing throughout the country. The idea, for example, that in New York now, and this goes to the whole issue of travel, the idea that there's going to be a 14-day quarantine for people coming to New York, and the idea that there's going to be quarantines throughout the country. You're also seeing what's happening in California. Places like Disneyland are not going to be allowed to open, in large part because the governor there, Gavin Newsom, putting more restrictions in place. And despite the fact that Disney World is still anticipated to open in Florida, new questions about whether consumers will even go given the spread. So I think all of these things are coming together at this time and putting pressure on the markets and really making, I think, investors rethink how quickly the economy can rebound. I think that's probably the biggest component of it right now. Whether that persists, that skepticism, or at least those questions which have not been asked, frankly, because there was this sort of optimism about reopening, whether that persists, I think, is still the question.
Part of that optimism, Seth, is coming from the top. In the last week alone, we've seen Treasury Secretary Mnuchin say we will not shut down the U.S. economy again. Larry Kudlow has said the same thing. How do they say things like that while the numbers are surging and we're seeing businesses make business decisions? Just yesterday, Apple reclosing some of their stores. Disney workers say they're not comfortable going back.
Well, it's because they're more worried about the president's politics than they are about the health and safety of American workers and American consumers. We're seeing in states like Virginia, states are taking action to protect workers from really dangerous decision-making by some of the folks in the federal government. And we're seeing corporations take action in order to protect their consumers and also to protect themselves from liability. You know, COVID is in the community, and workers and consumers need to be protected from it. But the federal government is playing no role at all in helping businesses and consumers and workers to know how to keep themselves safe in this dangerous context. Folks don't want to get sick. They don't want to die. They're frightened, and their federal government is turning its back on them.
Seth, what happens to those workers who say they don't feel safe going back to work? Do they lose their unemployment benefits?
In some states, they do. For example, famously, Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa announced that workers who didn't go back to work when they were offered their job, even if the workplace was unsafe, would lose their benefits. California has a different position. They allow workers to refuse to go back to an unsafe workplace. And this is really important, Steph. I entered into a partnership with Remesh, which does mass online focus grouping. And we talked to a group of 300 workers beginning of this month, representative group, and workers are scared to death. Only 1 in 3 workers believes it's safe to go back to their workplace. 76% of workers think that their workplace is only as safe as the sickest worker in the workplace. And the most important thing, Steph, is we saw a real racial disparity. 43% of white workers think it's safe to go back, but only 18% of African-American workers and 21% of Latinx workers think it's safe to go back. That is the consequence of the bitter experience of the last 3 months when African-Americans and Latinos are much, much more likely to get sick and to die as a consequence of COVID-19. That's because workplaces that they're working in are not safe.
Andrew, a month from now, we are going to see expanded unemployment benefits expire and other relief programs. We've heard that Republicans are saying we don't think we need to do more. Larry Kudlow has said over and over, well, because people are getting paid so much money on unemployment, they don't want to go back to work. Is that argument really going to hold much water? If we have 50 million people without jobs, no longer getting expanded benefits, that is certainly going to hit consumer spending, and I know the president cares about that.
I think there's no question that there's going to be a new conversation in Washington about stimulus measures and what we need to do about unemployment, what we need to do about those PPP loans for small businesses, which do expire at the end of this month. You know, there's sort of a perverse trade taking place in the markets also right now, which is to say that even though you can look at this spread around the country and it's from a health perspective, it is awful. There are investors out there saying, well, the more awful it gets, the more likely it is that the government is going to come to the rescue and pour more money into the system, and therefore I should buy stocks. I'm not sure that's the right trade or not, but just to sort of understand a little bit of the thinking of what's going on here. But yes, as spread continues and gets worse, there is going to be a need, a very necessary need, to help employees. And I think the issue you talked about employees who don't want to go back to work because they're scared is a real one. And how do we deal not just with those who are scared, but those who actually have genuine comorbidities or are at risk, and what we do to help them?
Seth, why aren't there more restrictions, guidelines, rules for businesses, many of which want to reopen? And there are some things happening on a state level, Virginia, for example, but for the most part, the federal government just says, let's get back to work, and they're not doing anything to create a framework to do so.
You're exactly right, Steph. It's because the federal government is in the grip of an anti-government philosophy that misunderstands what it is that businesses and workers and consumers want from government. They need information. We all need information about how to fight this very complicated pandemic. We need guidance, and we need to know that if others don't follow the guidance, because, you know, businesses are competing against one another, they need to know that if others are not following the guidance, that there's going to be accountability, that there's going to be a consequence. So federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration has received thousands and thousands and thousands of complaints from workers across the United States. They have issued exactly one COVID-19 related citation, one. When workers and businesses see that, they know there's no cop on the beat. They know there is no help in figuring out how to solve the difficult problems of how you keep the pandemic out of the workplace. And that's a big failure.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.